Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. I'm a past member of the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee, and currently I'm a district activist leader and trustee for the National MS Society, and I chair the Society's California Government Relations Advisory Committee. The MS Society's Ask an MS Expert webcast is designed to give us a place for the MS community to connect and to connect you with experts who are ready to answer your questions on the topics that impact people affected by MS every day. Please feel free to post your comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. MS navigators are online throughout today's program, answering those questions and connecting you to resources. MS can impact your ability to be productive. It can prevent you from enjoying certain activities. It can even get in the way of performing everyday tasks. And while you don't have control over your MS, you do have control over how you choose to respond to your changing circumstances. We're joined today by the Associate Vice President of Research at the National MS Society, Dr. Kathy Zackowski. Dr. Zackowski is also an occupational therapist, an adjunct associate professor at the Kennedy Krieger Institute and Johns Hopkins Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. And Dr. Zakowski is here to share some energy-conserving strategies you can use, along with modifications you can make to make life easier. Welcome, Dr. Zakowski, and thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be back.
When I introduced you, I mentioned that you're an occupational therapist, so I'm hoping you won't mind explaining what an occupational therapist does and how an occupational therapist is different from a physical therapist.
Yes, it's a really good question. I feel like this is a really common question too. So and let me just specify, an occupational therapist is trained to problem solve ways to allow you to do the tasks that are important to you. So the word occupation refers to how we spend our time, not only our jobs, which is often a misconception. And it's important to keep in mind that both OTs and PTs, or physical therapists and occupational therapists, will do an evaluation. And that evaluation is really important so we can see how you move and we can talk with you about your goals. And to know that we are partners with your neurologist and primary care physician. So it's important that we all talk to one another. So more specifically, occupational therapists will suggest the use of tools that can help make daily activities easier to do, help with helping to make places more functional for you, recommending equipment or assistive devices, advice around conserving energy, teaching skills for stress management and meeting goals. So it's a pretty broad variety of things that we can address. A physical therapist more specifically focuses on strength, range of motion, coordination, gross motor skills, or those skills that require larger muscles like walking. And occupational therapists help people live better despite having disability or illness by improving their skills. So we work very well with one another. So occupational therapists and physical therapists often will be seeing the same clients, but we have unique skill sets that are not redundant, but instead thought of as complementary. So I hope that helps.
Sounds like it does. And you're joining us today to talk about some of those strategies and tools that people can use to help minimize some of the everyday challenges they might face. So people have questions. Let's get right into it. We heard from Jennifer, who experiences weakness and sometimes even a lack of sensation in her hands. Jennifer says it's hard for her to button things and to grip large items like a carton of milk, for instance. What tools are available to Jennifer and others like Jennifer who might be experiencing problems with hand control?
It's really important to know that, using the internet will allow you to really find a lot of options. It's just important to know there are options. For one suggestion would be even just to use attach to your faucet an element that would allow the water to go on using a sensor, just like we find in public restrooms. Another really common device is this universal cuff that you can see pictured here that allows you to use any utensils and makes it so you don't have to grab that little silverware piece, but instead be able to have it attached to your hand. Another one listed here is that the one on the right is a way to cut items. So if it's hard to hold the vegetable or fruit that you're cutting, you have a higher risk of cutting yourself. So with this device, you put the food in the little plastic cup, you close it, and you push it up and down, and this will, the blade inside will cut it so that you don't need to worry about holding an item. So go maybe even to the next slide. There's a couple other options here. The one I really want to point out is the one on the right, and that is a use of a plastic pad called a Dyson. You can find this at Target or other stores, even drugstores. And the idea is it's a piece of plastic that's kind of sticky. So you can put a bowl on top of it so that when you're mixing, the bowl doesn't move, or you can put it on top of a jar when you're trying to open something so that you have a better grip on it. And this often makes it easier to open items. You can, maybe I think there's one more slide. Right, so I also wanted to point out, again, there's lots of ways to make even what you do in the bathroom easier. One thing that I found that I like to share with people is this idea of a portable hand dryer holder. So it's really hard, I know from having long hair, to hold your hand dryer and blow dry your hair. And when you have MS and you often have weakness or loss of sensation, it's really hard to do that. So if you can station your hand dryer on the counter and just be in charge of combing or brushing your hair, often that simplifies the task enough so that you have more independence. And there, other items that are listed here can be, you can find them even just by using the keywords that I have written there. So I wanted to show pictures just to give you ideas, but this is by no means expansive. There are quite a variety of options.
Candy tells us that she feels unstable in the shower. Since showers are a common place for accidents to happen, this is a real safety issue that Candy wants to address. What kinds of things are available to help someone with their balance in the shower? And while we're on the subject, maybe you can talk about other modifications that can make the bathroom safer and easier to navigate.
There we go. Thank you for this slide. What I wanted to show on the top left here is what's called a kind of universal design. So ideally, the bathroom is a really dangerous place. Everything is very hard. It's often wet. So you want to kind of think ahead. And when you're planning your bathroom space, make sure that you have the capability to sit much of the time. So as you can see in this photo, there's a sink, and being able to sit at the sink instead of stand often helps so that you don't fall. Having a handheld shower head makes it so you, again, can sit in the shower and then use the shower head to wash your hair and the rest of your body. And you can see there's on the bottom right, there's also a way to adapt a bathtub. And this bath seat is really unique in that 2 of the feet fit into the bathtub and 2 of the feet fit outside the bathtub. So you can sit and then move your legs into the bathtub and slide over. This same idea can be used in toileting as well. So there are transfer boards that you can use so that you can actually slide from a wheelchair, for example, to the toilet. Or if you're not in a wheelchair and it's just hard to stand from a toilet seat, you can use a raised toilet seat, and that can be purchased again at through the internet, but put onto any kind of toilet seat. So it's not that you need a whole new bathroom. There are things you can do to your bathroom right now to make it a little bit easier for you. So those are a couple of examples.
Well, let's move into the kitchen. Vinny told us that he loves to cook, but getting around the kitchen isn't as easy as it used to be. Can you share some tips that might make cooking easier and a little more enjoyable for Vinny?
Yes, I would love to. I think, this shows again kind of a universal design kitchen where you can sit for much of the time, and that's one recommendation I would have is make it so you don't use all your energy standing, but instead can use it for doing whatever you're doing for meal prep. I would also, kind of remind everybody that what I'm talking about is not, this is not rocket science, but these are the little things that if you can think about them and plan ahead for them, you can get a little bit more done with less energy. So one thing is to reorganize your kitchen. So don't let a lot of clutter be around, because then you have to move the clutter before you can work. Add lighting. It's a really simple addition, but it makes it so much easier to see what you're doing so that you don't cut yourself or misplace things as easily. Keep things that you're using a lot within easy reach. So it's much more energy consuming to reach over your head than to have items right at your kind of shoulder or waist height. Use drawers that have less resistance. So there's something called easy slide drawers. Also just adding handrails around the kitchen or dining room area so that as you're standing and trying to do something, you can actually hold on with one hand and work with the other. You just want to make it so that you're at lower risk of falling. So think ahead about ways that you might have almost fallen and try to use that as a tool to plan ahead so that doesn't happen again.
Jacob tells us that he has blurred vision. He says sometimes it's difficult for him to see and get around safely. Are there tools or strategies that can make it easier for people with vision issues to accomplish everyday tasks?
There are so many options now. There really are a lot of companies that are really trying to tap into this need for people with MS and other conditions who have blurred vision. So I only show a few here, but really trying to capitalize on the use of glasses. So not just for correcting your vision, but for actually magnifying the item. They can just be used for certain tasks. They're not for every moment use like regular glasses are. Using also, there are lots of ways to magnify a regular book, say a cookbook or a book you just want to read. And so that's what's being shown here. There are also, kind of things that are more day-to-day use, in that there are keyboards that are designed for low vision, so they have high contrast. So they're black on the background and the keys are white, or vice versa. So there's lots of different ways. I would recommend for Jacob to really figure out what his goal is, and then start looking around, ask an occupational therapist to help evaluate what tools are available. But there are plenty of tools to try at least and see if they can help him for the tasks he's interested in.
Well, you've shared some great ideas with us. What are some other gadgets or strategies that we haven't talked about that people can use around the house to make their daily lives easier?
So I think the idea is really to make it simpler for yourself. So you want to plan ahead for tasks. So if you go one more slide, I think I want to talk about this super pole here on the left. I know it sounds like the name's a little crazy, but the idea here is really that you can use this anywhere, and it gives you a handhold. So this can be packaged up and put into a suitcase, so it comes down to a much smaller space. Sometimes they fold. You can get something like this even at Costco. They're not a high-end item, but they are very practical and can allow you to do things even when you're not at home, or when you're at home and you're trying to do some activities. You want to balance independence in your high priority activities with assistance from others. Other ideas is to really explore ways to adapt common tasks, and that's why I wanted to bring up this pole, because I think you can adapt some of the things you do in your kitchen by adding a pole like this, which gives you something to lean up against and grab onto as you're moving around and doing things like meal prep or managing the home. You want to follow through with identifying and purchasing equipment, and making sure the equipment that you get is put into the home in a safe way. So make sure if you use something like a super pole or grab bars that they're put in correctly, so that when you need them, they're sturdy and there for you. I also would recommend using even using walkers and or a cane when you're tired. Think of them as a tool, not as what many of my patients will say is that, I feel like I'm kind of giving in to my MS symptoms by using these, but instead think I'm using my cane today because I'm really tired and I want to be able to get more done. And so it's more of a tool than a crutch, so to speak.
People experiencing mobility issues can sometimes find it difficult to get out of the house and go somewhere. I think you've already started to answer this question, but what are some of the ways to make it easier for people to get out and enjoy activities outside their home?
Yes, so the Super Pole is one thing I really recommend to people because it is so mobile. But there's also, as pictured here, there are ways to make even just getting in and out of the car a little bit easier. So you can add a portable handle, and this is just a rubber piece that can be put onto any car, but makes it a little easier and a little less energy consuming to get in and out of the car. Really, there are different ways to lift a wheelchair into the car. What's being shown is a more traditional lift that goes into a van, but even for other types of cars, there are gadgets that can be put into the trunk of your car that can help you lift a wheelchair or even a walker into your trunk, again, so that you can take it with you and be able to use it. Using also, again, if you don't like using a cane, there are walking poles that look a little less medical, as many people describe it, but really give you that sense of extra stability and less risk of falling, allowing you to travel and enjoy the many things that there are to do if you're traveling, but not putting yourself at risk. There might be one other slide that I wanted to point out. The ramps, right? Okay, so I just wanted to bring up really quickly, adding ramps to your home is really important, even for small changes. So I wrote kind of the rule here for how steep the ramp should be given kind of federal guidelines, but really even a ramp that lets you get over that threshold of your home, even if it's only an inch or two, really can make all the difference between falling as you're going in or out of the home versus just using your ramp. So I encourage you to think along these lines. There are things you can make even at home and not necessarily have to purchase, but by understanding sort of how steep you would want to make this a ramp, it really can make a big difference to people. And sometimes people have even traveled. You can fold up some of these ramps and bring them with you so that when you get to a hotel, you can use them in some respects. So being flexible and thinking kind of creatively is what I'm recommending.
While we're speaking of getting out and enjoying activities, we heard from Marge, who says she feels fatigued before the day is even half over, and she has a hard time getting things done. What can people like Marge do to conserve their energy while still being productive?
This is such an important question because it really is, there really are some things that I'm hoping you'll hear today that you can use and will help. We all talk about needing sleep. It's well known now. There's so much evidence suggesting that do what you can to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep, and that will help in being able to complete the tasks that you want to do each day. Plan your activities. So in the morning or in the evening, when you feel like you're at your best, plan your activities for the next day so that you can decide what do you need to do early on in the day when you might have more energy versus later. You want to plan to work at a relaxed, steady pace. It uses far more energy to be kind of frantic or be rushed. And so the best way to avoid that is to plan and give yourself sort of that chance to get as much done as you can within the time you have. Prioritizing your tasks, breaking a big task into smaller tasks so that you can plan to do a part of a task, take a little rest, and then finish the task. So taking short, frequent breaks, not necessarily naps, but just little breaks, even 5 minutes of just sitting and catching your breath and kind of thinking through what your next steps will be can really help. You want to rest before you get really tired, because that's when I think accidents are more likely to happen. And that's what we want to avoid, right? We want to avoid the fall, and then you have to, get yourself up from the floor or hurting yourself because you're falling against something. So another idea that's talked about a lot is kind of spacing out activities, so you have a little bit of time to get things done and still have a break in between. I mentioned earlier, sitting when possible, really make sure you plan. Is there a way that you could sit in the kitchen or put a chair within reach so you could work a little bit and then come back and really sit down and rest your back even against something for a few minutes? I can't complete one, I feel like one way of talking about conserving energy is really to build your energy by exercising regularly. So you don't want to overdo it. You want to start by kind of underdoing the exercise just a little bit at a time. But if you're consistent, you can gradually increase, and that will increase your overall endurance. And then last thing I want to mention is really recognizing that with MS, doing things in warm, humid weather often feels much more difficult, and plan for that. Understand that that's the case for the summer season, and be aware of that and plan. I guess is the biggest strategy, I would say.
Well, I heard you mention prioritizing and planning your activities is one way to conserve energy and be more productive. The same strategy can also help if someone is experiencing cognitive challenges. What are some other strategies or tools that can help people who might be experiencing problems with memory, concentration, or problem solving?
Yeah, this area of research has come a long way, and so now really the task is to get some of these new interventions out to people. But there are a lot of ways that we can work on this. We know that issues like poor memory, even word finding, or problems with problem solving are so common in so many people with MS. So some examples would be to use computerized cognitive training. There are ways to participate in this kind of rehabilitation from your home with the guidance of an occupational therapist, sometimes the guidance of a psychologist. There are also smartphone applications that you can use to help remember important events, and online resources to manage your finances, so that they are available. And when you can set up scheduled times for yourself to go back and remind yourself what you like. If you're doing your finances, that once a week I'm going to go back and I'm going to go back to the same spreadsheet. And there are apps that can walk you through problem solving types of questions to be sure that you're not forgetting things. Other ways that cognitive issues become more of a critical problem is just in taking your medications. And so there are actually medication bottles that they make now, which can they emit a light when you've taken the medication for the day, so that you can just look back at that bottle and say, okay, that I've already done that today. I don't need to go back for today and take that medication, or just using a plain, pill box. But there are plenty of ways online, I guess, is the message I want to get across, that you can do some things at home now to really work on some of those issues.
Because MS symptoms can fluctuate, it can sometimes be difficult for someone to recognize when they need help adapting their environment and accomplishing everyday tasks. What's the best way for someone to assess whether it's time to seek help from an occupational therapist?
Right. So obvious signs include things like you're falling a little more often, or you see your loved one falling more often, or you see them almost falling. That's even better, right? So you want to try to assess why that's happening, and that's where an occupational therapist can really come into play. Listening to growing concern from people in your family or caregivers. Other really obvious signs would be a lack of hygiene. So sort of noticing that it's harder to stay clean, or your loved one who has MS, it's harder for them to stay clean. It sounds simple, but really bathroom hygiene is very difficult with many of these, many of the issues that you have, many of the symptoms you have with MS. Other common problems could include lack of interest or memory problems. Noticing that other people are noticing is kind of important, but an occupational therapist can just do an evaluation and offer suggestions. So it might not even require going to an OT multiple times. It might be just a good evaluation would be what's necessary to give you those ideas for how to address the issues that are at hand right now.
Well, thank you for sharing some great information about how someone can make relatively minor changes that deliver major benefits when it comes to adapting their environment and their mindset to make sure that they can accomplish more of what they want to do every day. What would you say are the top 3 takeaways that you'd like our viewers to remember?
Yeah, I knew that was coming, so I've been prepared. I think the 3 things I would really recommend would be to take a moment to identify specific tasks that are important to you, but that you find difficult to do, and try to break it down into components so that they're solvable. The many times you can do this even by talking with a friend about it to get ideas, but that's where an OT might be helpful. My second piece of advice would be really to give yourself some grace, to accept help at times, but make it at times of your choosing. So identify what you want to do in the day, and recognize that you might need help at some point, and kind of preparing yourself for that. My third piece of advice would be to think about the use of equipment as tools that make tasks more achievable for you. It's not a crutch. It's not that you're giving in. It's that you're being smart and you're using equipment to allow you to maintain your quality of life. As these issues with MS might come and go, you might use the equipment some days and not all the days, but allow yourself to do that. So those are my pieces of advice at this point.
Well, I want to thank everyone who submitted some great questions, and thank you for being with us today, Dr. Zakowski.
Thank you.
Before we close, I want to remind you that the National MS Society's MS Navigator team is your best partner when it comes to connecting you to the very best information and resources on living with MS. You can reach an MS Navigator by phone, email, or through the Society's website by chat. And for information and resources on MS, please visit the Society's website. You'll find research updates and news, information on connection programs like self-help groups and MS Friends. You'll see ways for you to get involved, and you'll hear about upcoming events that are taking place near you. Remember, you can connect with the National MS Society and others affected by MS on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And I hope you'll join me every week on the Real Talk MS podcast, where I continue the conversation that we start here. You'll find Real Talk MS at realtalkms.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. I'd like to thank Dr. Zakowski for joining us today. Please remember that a recording of this webcast will be available at the Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSexpert, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. I hope you'll join us at this same time for next week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. You can always find our upcoming program topics on the National MS Society's website. And now I have a favor to ask each of you. Getting your feedback on today's webcast is important. So if you're watching on Facebook Live, you'll see a link to a survey pinned to the comments section. And on YouTube, you'll find that link in the program description. Completing the survey makes a real difference. The information you provide helps us to continuously improve, and it helps shape future programs. The survey takes just 1 minute, so I hope you'll take a minute to fill it out. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Zackowski and the National MS Society, I want to thank you once again for joining us. Please stay safe and make healthy choices.